Welcome to Quiz Time. I'm your quiz master, Sean. And as usual, I have lots of questions for you. 100 questions to be exact about World War II history. So, let's see what we know and what we remember. Maybe even learn something. Which British operation involved seizing Axis ships from a neutral Spanish port without firing a shot? Operation Postmaster, Chariot, or Claymore? That was Operation Postmaster. During which operation did British intelligence use a corpse to mislead Nazis about the Allied invasion location? Operation Fortitude, Mincemeat, or Bodyguard? And that was Operation Mincemeat. Which Soviet tactic involved deploying bomb-carrying dogs to target enemy tanks in World War II? Was that canine bombers, dog mines, or explosive hounds? It was dog mines. What was the purpose of constructing fake towns in the Nevada desert during the 1950s nuclear tests? Was it for population simulation, blast effect study, or urban planning? And that was for blast effect study. Which British woman used her German fluency to intercept and translate Nazi communications during World War II? Was that Pat Outram, Jean Leslie, or Vera Atkins? And that was Pat Outram. Which 1943 operation failed because commandos landed on an Italian beach that unexpectedly hosted a German machine gun school? Operation Halyard, Frankton, or Ginny 2? That was Operation Ginny 2. Which codename referred to Japan's secret research into biological weapons conducted at a unit in Manchuria? Unit 731, Project Iris, or Code Sakura? And that was Unit 731. Which Allied mission involved building a pipeline under the English Channel to supply fuel after D-Day? Operation Pluto, Operation Neptune, or Operation Avalanche? That was Operation Pluto. Which American general was tasked with faking an invasion at Pas-de-Calais using inflatable tanks and props? George Patton, Omar Bradley, or Dwight Eisenhower? That was the genius of George Patton. Which Pacific island was defended by nearly 20,000 Japanese troops and required over a month to capture fully? Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, or Tarawa? And that would be Iwo Jima. Which country's resistance movement produced the most sabotage reports received by the British Special Operations Executive? Poland, Norway, or France? And that was France. Which German battleship was sunk after being trapped in a Norwegian fjord during Operation Catechism in 1944? Scharnhorst, Bismarck, or Tirpitz? And that was, Tirpitz. Which Polish cryptologist was key to breaking early versions of the Enigma code before Alan Turing's involvement? Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosycki, or Henryk Zygalsk? Marian Rejewski. What was the nickname for the secret British projects that developed radar technology during World War II? Chain Home, Ultra, or Enigma? And that was Chain Home. Which World War II battle was the largest tank battle in history, fought mainly between Germany and the Soviet Union? Kursk, Stalingrad, or El Alamein? And that was Kursk. Which British officer led the famous long-range desert group behind enemy lines in North Africa? David Stirling, Ralph Bagnold, or John Enoch Powell? And that was Ralph Bagnold. Which plane earned the nickname Flying Fortress and served as a major U.S. heavy bomber? The B-24 Liberator, the B-17 Flying Fortress, or the B-29 Super Fortress? And that would be the B-17 Flying Fortress. Which secret British unit specialized in creating explosives disguised as everyday objects during World War II? The Special Air Service, the SOE, or MI9? And that was the SOE. What was the main purpose of Operation Mincemeat, a British deception plan in 1943? Was it fake invasion plans? Was it an assassination mission? Or was it to sabotage German factories? It was about fake invasion plans. Which World War II battle marked the Allies' first significant win against Japan's Imperial Army? Midway, Guadalcanal, or Coral Sea? It was Guadalcanal. Which Axis country switched sides in 1943 after the Allied invasion of Sicily? Was it Hungary? Was it Romania? Or was it Italy? It was Italy. Which Allied operation successfully rescued over 500 downed airmen from the Yugoslav mountains in 1944? Was it Operation Halyard, Dragon, or Market Garden? It was Operation Halyard. What was the code name for the German invasion plan of the Soviet Union launched in June 1941? Barbarossa, Overlord, or Sea Lion? It was Operation Barbarossa. Which British code-breaking center was located at Bletchley Park during World War II? Was it Station X? Was it Pinewood? Or was it Porton Down? And the correct answer is Station X. Which German military leader earned the nickname Desert Fox for commanding in North Africa? Erwin Rommel, Heinz Guderian, or Frederick Paulus? Erwin Rommel was the Desert Fox. Which U.S. president gave the go-ahead for the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb? Was it Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, or Dwight Eisenhower? The go-ahead was given by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Which Japanese city was the first to suffer an atomic bombing in World War II? Tokyo, Nagasaki, or Hiroshima? It was Hiroshima. Which country endured the longest siege during World War II, lasting nearly 900 days? Was it Leningrad, Stalingrad, or Warsaw? And we mean which city endured it? Leningrad, 900 days. What was the main role of Britain's Women's Auxiliary Air Force during the war? Was it combat pilots, radar operators, or frontline medics? They were radar operators. Which German battleship was sunk by the British after air attacks in 1941? Was it the Bismarck, the Scharnhorst, or the Tirpitz? It was the Bismarck. Which U.S. aircraft carrier was sunk at the Battle of Midway in June 1942? Was it the USS Yorktown, the USS Enterprise, or the USS Hornet? It was the USS Yorktown. Which German city suffered the first major Allied bombing raid targeting industrial production in 1942? Hamburg, Dresden, or Cologne? It was Cologne. Which resistance group in Poland played a significant role in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944? Was it the Home Army, the Jewish Combat Organization, or the Partisans? And that would be the Home Army. Which battle is seen as the major turning point on the Eastern Front in World War II? Kursk, Stalingrad, or Moscow? It was Stalingrad. Which operation was the code name for the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943? Operation Husky, Operation Torch, or was it Operation Avalanche? It was Operation Husky. Who was the commander of the Japanese forces during the Battle of Midway in 1942? Isoroku Yamamoto, Tomoyuki Yamashita, or Tadamichi Kuribayashi? It was Isoroku Yamamoto. Which Allied country supplied the most tanks to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program? Was it the United Kingdom, the United States, or was it Canada? It was the United States. What was the name of the German secret police responsible for suppressing opposition within the Third Reich? The Gestapo, the SS, or the Wehrmacht? It was the Gestapo. Which British Prime Minister gave the famous "We shall fight on the beaches" speech in 1940? Was that Winston Churchill, Neville Chamberlain, or Clement Attlee? It was Winston Churchill. Which event led to the United States entering World War II after a surprise attack in December 1941? Was it the attack on Pearl Harbor, Midway, or Coral Sea? Of course, that was the attack on Pearl Harbor. Which military strategy involved rapid coordinated attacks combining air and ground forces used by Germany? Was that a blitzkrieg, attrition, or trench warfare? That was a blitzkrieg. Which American general commanded the Allied forces in the Pacific Theater during the latter part of World War II? Was that Chester Nimitz, George Patton, or Douglas MacArthur? That was Douglas MacArthur. Which battle is known for the largest amphibious invasion in history on June 6, 1944? Was it Normandy, Anzio, or Salerno? That was Normandy. Which Axis leaders signed the Tripartite Pact, creating the Axis Powers Alliance in 1940? Benito Mussolini, Hideki Tojo, or Adolf Hitler? That was Adolf Hitler. Which World War II German encryption machine was called the Enigma for secret communications? Was that a cipher machine, a radar, or was it a telegraph? And that would be a cipher machine. Which battle stopped the Japanese advance toward Australia in 1942? Was it the Battle of Coral Sea, the Battle of Guadalcanal, or the Battle of Guadalcanal? 50-50. And that would be the Battle of Coral Sea. Which World War II treaty secretly divided Eastern Europe between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union? Was it the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Treaty of Versailles, or the Yalta Agreement? And that was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Who led the French resistance and later became the President of France after World War II? Was it Jean Moulin, Philippe Pétain, or Charles de Gaulle? That was Charles de Gaulle. Which World War II battle is famous for the fierce fighting in a Belgian town known as the last major German offensive? The Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of Arnhem, or the Battle of Bastogne? That was the Battle of the Bulge. Which World War II aircraft was known as the Flying Fortress due to its heavy armament and durability? The B-17, the Spitfire, or the Lancaster? And that would be the B-17. Which conference in 1945 decided the post-war division of Germany among the Allied powers? Was that Yalta, Potsdam, or Tehran? And that would be the Potsdam Conference. Which battle was the first major defeat of German forces on Soviet territory in 1942? Was it Stalingrad, Kursk, or Leningrad? And that was at Stalingrad. What was the primary mission of the Soviet all-female Night Witches bombing squadron? Was that to perform night bombing raids? Were they intelligence gathering? Or were they frontline medics? They were performing night bombing raids. Which weapon did Germany introduce in 1944 as the world's first operational cruise missile? Was it the V-1 flying bomb, the V-2 rocket, or the Panzerfaust? That was the V-1 flying bomb. Which World War II operation was the Allied invasion of French North Africa in November 1942? Was that Operation Torch, Operation Husky, or Operation Avalanche? That was Operation Torch. Who was the head of the Soviet secret police responsible for many wartime purges? Lavrentiy Beria, Nikolai Yezhov, or Felix Dzerzhinsky? It was Lavrentiy Beria. Which German general surrendered to Soviet forces at the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943? Was it Friedrich Paulus, Erwin Rommel, or Heinz Guderian? It was Friedrich Paulus. Which British fighter aircraft was pivotal during the Battle of Britain in 1940? Spitfire, Hurricane, or Lancaster? And that was the Spitfire. Which battle in 1943 marked the last major German offensive in the Western Desert Campaign? The Battle of El Alamein, the Battle of Tobruk, or the Battle of Gazala? It was the Battle of El Alamein. Which Allied operation was designed to mislead the Germans about where the Normandy invasion would occur? Was it Operation Fortitude, Operation Overlord, or Operation Market Garden? That was Operation Fortitude. Who was the British commander in charge during the Dunkirk evacuation in 1940? Was that Lord Gort, Bernard Montgomery, or Alan Brooke? And it was Lord Gort who was in command. Which World War II ship was famously attacked at Pearl Harbor and later salvaged and returned to service? Was that the USS Missouri, the USS Arizona, or the USS West Virginia? That was the USS West Virginia. Which Soviet city earned the nickname City of Heroes for resisting a harsh Nazi siege? Leningrad, Stalingrad, or Moscow? And that was Leningrad. Which secret American project developed the first atomic bombs used in World War II? Was that the Apollo Project, the Trinity Project, or was that the Manhattan Project? That was the Manhattan Project. Which World War II battle was the largest tank battle ever fought in history? Was it the Battle of Kursk, the Battle of El Alamein, or the Battle of the Bulge? That was a Battle of Kursk. Who led the German Africa Corps during the North African Campaign? Was that Heinz Guderian, Gerd von Rundstedt, or Erwin Rommel? That was Erwin Rommel. Which country suffered the highest civilian casualties due to the German invasion during World War II? Was that the Soviet Union, Poland, or France? That would be the Soviet Union. Which Allied leader proposed the idea of the United Nations during World War II? Was it Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, or Joseph Stalin? And that was proposed by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Which major port city was liberated by Allied forces during Operation Dragoon in 1944? Was it Marseille, Toulon, or Nice? And that was Marseille. Which American pilot became a leading ace with 26 confirmed aerial victories in World War II? Was that Richard Bong, Chuck Yeager, or Jimmy Doolittle? That was Richard Bong. Which city was heavily bombed in the Operation Gomorrah air raids by the Allies in 1943? Hamburg, Dresden, or Berlin? And that was Hamburg. Which treaty allowed the United States to lend military equipment to Allied nations during World War II? Was that the Lend-Lease Act, the Neutrality Act, or the Atlantic Charter? And that was the Lend-Lease Act. Which British code-breaking center was instrumental in decoding Axis communications? Was it Bletchley Park, Camp X, or Pine Gap? And that was Bletchley Park. Which World War II battle involved a massive Soviet counterattack ending the German siege of Leningrad? Operation Uranus, Operation Barbarossa, or Operation Iskra? It was Operation Iskra. Which country did the Free French Forces primarily base their operations during World War II? Was it the United Kingdom, Canada, or Algeria? They based them in the United Kingdom. Which 1940 agreement allowed Nazi Germany to annex part of Czechoslovakia without resistance? Was that the Munich Agreement, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or was that the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk? It was the Munich Agreement. Which Allied general led Operation Market Garden, an unsuccessful airborne assault in the Netherlands? Bernard Montgomery, Dwight D. Eisenhower, or Omar Bradley? It was Bernard Montgomery. Which ship was the site of the Japanese surrender, officially ending World War II? The HMS Prince of Wales, the USS Arizona, or the USS Missouri? The ship was the USS Missouri. Which secret agreement between Britain and the U.S. outlined post-war goals for Europe? The Atlantic Charter, the Yalta Agreement, or the Potsdam Declaration? It was the Atlantic Charter. Which German city was heavily bombed by the Allies in February 1945, resulting in massive civilian casualties? Was that Dresden, Hamburg, or Cologne? It was Dresden. Who commanded U.S. forces during the Normandy invasion in 1944? Was that Douglas MacArthur, Dwight D. Eisenhower, or George Patton? It was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Which Allied campaign forced Axis troops to surrender in Tunisia in 1943? Was it the North Africa Campaign? Was it the Italian Campaign? Or was it the Balkan Campaign? It was the North Africa Campaign. Which battle was the longest continuous military siege in World War II, lasting over 2 years? Was that the Siege of Leningrad, the Siege of Tobruk, or the Siege of Stalingrad? It was the Siege of Leningrad. Which World War II general earned the nickname Old Blood and Guts for his bold tactics? Was that George S. Patton, Bernard Montgomery, or Douglas MacArthur? Old Blood and Guts. That's General George S. Patton. Which 1942 naval battle was a crucial turning point in the Pacific War? Was it the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Battle of Coral Sea, or the Battle of Midway? It was the Battle of Midway. Which World War II event involved the forced relocation and internment of Japanese Americans? Was it Executive Order 9066, Operation Barbarossa, or Operation Overlord? It was Executive Order 9066. Which World War II battle featured the first major use of combined British and American paratroopers? Was that Operation Market Garden? Was it Operation Overlord? Or was it Operation Husky? It was Operation Husky. Which German town was the site of a major trial prosecuting Nazi war criminals after World War II? Did those take place in Nuremberg, Dachau, or Munich? They took place in Nuremberg. Which island battle saw U.S. forces raise their flag atop Mount Suribachi in 1945? Was it Iwo Jima? Was it Okinawa? Or was it Saipan? It was Iwo Jima. Which major German city fell to Soviet forces after intense urban combat in May 1945? Leipzig, Frankfurt, or Berlin? It was Berlin. Which German operation aimed to capture the Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus region? Was it Operation Edelweiss, Operation Barbarossa, or Operation Typhoon? 'Twas Operation Edelweiss. What was the name of Britain's code-breaking project at Bletchley Park? Was it called Ultra, Enigma, or Cipher? And it was called Ultra. Which German operation planned the invasion of the United Kingdom in World War II? Was that Operation Torch, Operation Barbarossa, or Operation Sea Lion? That was Operation Sea Lion. Which battle is considered the largest naval battle ever fought? The Battle of Midway, the Battle of Coral Sea, or the Battle of Leyte Gulf? That was the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Which country was invaded by Germany on September 1, 1939, starting World War II? Was it Poland, Czechoslovakia, or France? It was the invasion of Poland. Which 1940 rescue operation evacuated Allied troops from France across the English Channel? Was that Operation Avalanche, the Dunkirk evacuation, or Operation Torch? It was the Dunkirk evacuation. Which British city was bombed for 57 nights straight during the Blitz? Was it Birmingham, Liverpool, or London? And for 57 straight nights, London was bombed. Which country was invaded by Germany on September 1st, 1939, starting World War II? Poland, Czechoslovakia, or France? Well, if you missed it last time, you surely got it now. That'd be Poland. Which U.S. ship was sunk by a German U-boat, influencing American opinion? The USS Reuben James, the USS Arizona, or the USS Indianapolis? That would be the USS Reuben James. And now question 100. Which operation was the code name for the Allied invasion of Italy in 1943? Operation Avalanche, Operation Torch, or Operation Overlord. And that was Operation Avalanche. Well, there you have it. You did an amazing job. So, don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell if you haven't already. Share your score in the comments, please. And check out these videos right here. They're a lot of fun too. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.